Back when I was a kid, I had this regular babysitter who was the daughter of one of my dad's coworkers. I kind of hated her at the time. She was terrible at her job. I had other babysitters who I actually liked, so I knew she was terrible. She seemed like she didn't want to be there at all. She was also super strict with me, overzealously carrying my parents' rules to the letter as a way of taking out her spite on me. I got used to doing things like having to call downstairs first if I even wanted to get a glass of water after bedtime, not even daring to turn on my nightlight because she made me sleep with my door open so she could check every 30 minutes. It sounds harsh, I know, but my parents had always been pretty strict too. I guess my dad's coworker figured their influence as well as the responsibility would do her some good. Anyway, this one night when she arrived, she seemed quite different. I remember my mom and dad, the poor naive souls, were telling her that it was okay if she didn't feel well and wanted to be driven back home. She refused, telling them she was just a little bit tired and would take a nap once I'd been put down to bed. Boy, did she really seem tired too. She was nodding out as I was eating dinner, was way laxer than she usually was. I remember thinking that if she was like this every time she babysat me in the future, I wouldn't have to dread her arrival anymore. She actually forgot to put me to bed on time too. I got like 45 minutes of extra TV while she napped on the couch. For a while, she was actually sleeping with her phone held up near her face. I thought it was the funniest thing at the time, but if I had known what was actually going on, I wouldn't have thought it so amusing. A few hours later, I woke up incredibly thirsty. I stuck my head out into the hallway and started calling out to her, asking permission to come downstairs and get a glass of water, as we agreed to. For the first time since she'd ever started babysitting me, there was no reply when I called her name. No, oh my god, what do you want now? No, go back to sleep, jeez. Nothing like that. It was complete silence, other than the low hum of the TV from downstairs. I could just feel something was off, but I couldn't tell what exactly. I headed downstairs to try and find her. I grew up in quite a big home, one with an upstairs and a downstairs bathroom. The downstairs bathroom door was only ever closed when it was being used. That clued me into the fact that she must be in there right now. I stood there at the door for a while, actually kind of worried about how much trouble I'd get in for being downstairs after bedtime. But then it hit me. Something had seemed off that night, that she wasn't feeling well. Maybe she was in some kind of trouble herself. I knocked on the door, called out her name again, only to find the door actually opened a little under the force of my knock. People always lock the door when they use the bathroom, don't they? I knew something was wrong here, so I pushed the door open. I saw her sitting there, toilet lid down and slumped back, with something sticking out of her arm. I didn't even recognize it for what it really was in the moment. I didn't know anything about drugs back then. The only needles I'd ever seen were with me facing away from it and wincing, so it's not like I recognized right off the bat. I thought she was just asleep. I honestly thought she was napping. She was leaning back against the toilet, completely slumped over. Any grown-up in their right mind would have known something was wrong right away, but she just looked so peaceful. So peaceful I didn't want to wake her. I just got my glass of water, then went back to drift back off to sleep. Next thing I know, I was woken up to the sound of my mom screaming. Then the rest of the night was kind of a blur for me. The flash of blue and red lights outside, the phone calls and weeping and wailing. Then, almost equally worse, was how my mom and dad seemed to try and forget the whole thing. I think they did so for my sake, so I wouldn't realize how my inaction had actually killed this girl. If I had called someone, they say she would have still been alive, but there's no way I could have known that back then. This is a short story that happened to me several years ago when I was in junior high school. All my friends got to travel to Myrtle Beach with the baseball team for spring break. Since I didn't play baseball, I was stuck at home. My one friend Dave was home too, since we were the skaters of the friend group. We spent most nights of the break hanging out together and not really doing much of anything, except for one night. We stayed at Dave's house. He lives literally in the middle of the woods. The closest neighborhood isn't really that far away, but because of where his house is located, it truly feels like the middle of nowhere. Toward the end of the break, we snuck out of the house one night to see a girl who lived nearby. She and a few of the other girls from school were still in town, and we figured we would go and hang out with them. Like I said, it wasn't really far away. Just a sort of unnerving walk, because there aren't very many lights and most of it is in the seclusion of trees and rocks. We had an awesome time hanging out with the girls. I liked this one girl at the time, so it was great to be able to spend so much time with her. When we were walking back to the house that night, though, we noticed some random guy following us. I didn't really think anything of it. Dave was freaked out, though. I told him to just relax. The guy was following us closely, but not close enough for us to need to panic. When we made it back to his house, I watched the guy continue walking up the street. He never seemed to look back once. I looked at my buddy and told him that he was freaking out for no reason. The next night, we hung out again. His parents were going to be out of town for the weekend, so he was going to have the house all to himself. Since he was embarrassed by his house, he didn't want to have anyone over. Trust me when I say I pushed very hard for the girls to come over too, but I lost the argument in the end. I told the girls we couldn't hang out there, so instead, Dave and I walked over to her house again. This time, we spent a more considerable amount of time there, and didn't walk home until after about 3 in the morning. Dave was relieved on the way home that we didn't have anybody following us this time. I helped him close up the house and we got comfortable in the living room before passing out on the couches. At this point in the night, it was actually one of the best nights of my life. I actually got to kiss the girl I liked so much, and I legitimately felt invincible. Not long after lying down, though, we heard a sudden knock at the door. We both froze in place. "Who is that?" exclaimed Dave. The knock came again, a low rhythmic knocking. Each bang on the wood made my hair stand on end. I slowly got up, and standing a few feet from the door, I called out, "Who is it?" There was no response right away. Then, though, a young female voice shouted from the other side. "Hey, I was wondering if I could hide inside." I didn't say anything right away. The absurd nature of that statement and the calm tone of the woman's voice left me speechless. Before I could say anything, she spoke again. "It's going to be too late if you don't let me in. Can I please hide inside your house?" When I said I was speechless, I mean I was absolutely at a loss for words. I had a million things flying through my mind, and I didn't know what to do. My instincts told me that this must be one of the girls playing a joke on us. But I didn't recognize that voice at all. I decided not to answer, and Dave decided the same. We sat there in silence, and then I noticed the doorknob starting to slowly jiggle back and forth. It became more aggressive with time. Then the calm voice from the other side instantly became more sinister. "Open the damn door now!" I was finally able to shout to go away. I was going to call the police. There were no sounds for a few seconds. Then the woman spoke again. She started in a soft tone, and in the middle of her sentence, I could hear her getting sinister once more. "Honey, if you don't open the door right now, I'm going to lose my mind." Dave finally jumped up from the couch and shouted at this person to go away. Then, though, we could hear a second voice from behind the door. It was a deep voice, clearly that of a man. "Good call, bud. Very, very good call." Right after he said that, I thought I could hear what sounded like footsteps walking away. I looked out the window and saw 2 people walking down the street. One of them looked suspiciously like the person from the previous night. They just had a very similar stature. We were terrified and stayed awake the rest of the night. Since his parents weren't home, We didn't call the police, though obviously we should have. Dave was scared his parents would get mad if the police showed up and they weren't home on Sunday morning. When his parents finally did come home, he told them what happened, and they instantly called the police, calling us stupid for not doing so. I mean, better late than never, I guess. Since several hours had passed since the woman had been at the door, the police were honest with Dave's parents and told them they would probably never catch these two people. They assured us, though, they would be on the lookout for any similar incidents. I have no idea what those two wanted or who they even were. I don't even like being outside at night anymore. That night really messed me up for a long time, and I'm still trying to recover from the nightmares I endured because of it. Over 4 years ago, I went to work in a warehouse in the small town that I'm from. I decided to leave though after my health started to get worse. I was diagnosed with panic disorder and severe anxiety after the situation that I'm about to tell you. This changed the way I developed friendships after that job, that much is for certain. So I started this job on April Fool's Day of 2018. Needless to say, I had no high expectations of this job at all. All I wanted was to do something, get paid, and go home. I had 2 little ones waiting for me back there, and many things I could work on as well. The job itself wasn't hard, and made some decent money for all the duties considered. I really couldn't complain much. I worked second shift for about 5 months, and then I went to the day shift. While working on second shift, I kept mostly to myself, until one day, I met someone from one of the lines after we struck up a conversation about gaming. For the sake of anonymity, we'll call him JF. Well, JF seemed like a pretty good guy, and we had a lot of things in common as well. I went home that night, and he popped up as a suggested friend on Facebook, so I decided to add him. When I did so, we started talking more at work until he suggested we should hang out outside of it, and so we did, pretty frequently at that. We were friends for a month at this point, when one day he decided he was going to introduce me to his partner. She seemed decent at first, super nice, didn't seem to be judgmental either, so I thought she was pretty cool. From then on, I would hang out with him when my kids were spending time with my mother. One day, we were talking at a restaurant when he started to vent to me. Dude, she's such a bitch sometimes. The other day, I forgot to take the trash out and she threatened to stab me. I've never been in a relationship where someone's threatened me like that. I think she's got good intentions though, so I don't know. When he said that to me, I was concerned, but of course, we've only been friends for a month or so. I thought maybe he was just joking morbidly, so I chuckled at him. He gave me a pretty serious look though. I'm not joking, she really did say that. I got very concerned. Fast forward about 8 months. They're still together, and we all hung out pretty regularly. I forgot about the things he'd told me that day. One day though, we were all talking, and he seemed a little bit off that day, so I asked him what was wrong right in front of her. He flashed a smirk and said, "Nothing, dude, I'm just a little bit tired." He didn't have his eyes on me though, he had them on her. When we went to work the next day, I once again asked him what was wrong. "Okay, so you promised to keep this a secret between us?" Of course, I agreed. He said that he was breaking up with her, and she went a little bit crazy. He said she'd grabbed her gun, pointed it at him, and said, "If I can't have you, then no one will." He told me he'd managed to defuse the situation and was trying to look for a way out. Not really knowing what else to say, I just said, "If you need to go somewhere then, you can stay with me until you get her out of the house." Fast forward another year. He finally decided to leave her fully. When he did, she flipped out again. This time though, he told her over text. She said she was going to find him and kill him. He was actually out of work that day, on a vacation day. He sent me a text too. "Hey, let me know if she comes over looking for me." That struck me as odd because I had no idea of the situation currently unfolding. She did come into our job and asked me where he was. I have no idea. I thought he was with you and you guys went out of town or something." She rolled up her window and drove off. I called him and told him she'd just come by, and he called the police about it. They found her just up the road from his house with a loaded gun in the car. And 2 months later, he decided to talk to her again. When he did, he had something to tell me. When he called me, he asked if I had seen her around, and I hadn't. He then said this to me. I would take some vacation days if I were you." I asked him why. "Because she's out of jail. I heard her cousins are in town trying to find the people she has beef with, and I guess you're one of them." At that point, I was terrified. I grabbed my kids and got out of town. I took 2 weeks off work, too. Came to find out the next day, her and her cousins went to the next town over and shot 3 people in an apartment and killed them. I got the news about it the day after it happened. The reason why he knew they were coming after me is because apparently they'd made a Facebook Messenger group and accidentally included him, and it had a list of names. Everyone regarded it as spam and decided to disregard the message, but he knew exactly what it was. 3 of the names on that list were the people that got shot. The 4th name on that list was mine. After they found the evidence, he decided to go public about the group and the screenshots that he had. They were all charged with first-degree murder. From then on, I was very careful about who I would stick my neck out for, because even though he knew the context of that list and her intentions, he decided not to inform anyone but me on it. Needless to say, we aren't friends anymore, and I think I dodged a bullet. The single worst day of my life started in the unlikeliest of ways when I took a trip to visit my grandpa near Omaha, Nebraska. The first problem I ran into was the lack of cell signal out there in the sticks. No internet meant my GPS started going haywire, and I'd never been great at reading physical maps. That, and there were basically no road signs anywhere. The ones that were there were in such bad shape you could barely read them, even if you slowed down heavily when passing by. In the end, I had to actually stop by some random guy's house to ask for directions. The fact that even he didn't seem to know what I was talking about didn't really fill me with much confidence. He did mention of knowing of an old house off a dirt road, maybe a mile or 2 away from his own. He said it wouldn't be the easiest to find, but he was basically 75% sure it was close to the area I was talking about. I went off and headed in the direction he'd pointed out, hoping to make it to my grandpa's before lunchtime. A few minutes later, I spotted a dirt road turnoff that I thought might be the one the man had been talking about. After driving down it for a few minutes, though, I didn't see any houses or any kind of civilization. I figured I must have made a wrong turn. Not surprising, considering how crappy the infrastructure was, but it was pretty frustrating. Then, luckily, I saw a driveway out of nowhere. I started to get my hopes up, thinking this must be my grandpa's place. It clearly wasn't, though. There were a bunch of men with a van and a car, all stood around talking. My grandpa wasn't exactly one for company, but I figured at least I could ask them for some more directions. That's exactly what I went to do, but the second I turned into their driveway, I noticed the men standing around started to act a little anxious. One guy immediately tore away from the circle they had going. Another looked around, as though he was expecting other people to show up or something. I realized I must have just interrupted something very private. I didn't fully realize the danger I'd just driven into, though. Right as I stopped the car, I heard one of the guys yell something to another. Then I took my eyes off them for a second as I reached for the road map I had. When I looked up again, all I could see was a gun pointing at me through my driver's side window. I realized now in the few seconds that followed that I was just waiting for the guy to pull the trigger. I can't remember anything other than gun, but I didn't move. I just froze there, didn't try to back out or duck or anything. I just sort of waited for everything to turn black, like on a nature documentary when a deer gets caught by a tiger or something. They just sort of go limp as they're thinking, well, I guess this is it. Seconds later, the guy with the gun said, "Turn off the engine." Then, when I did, he followed up with, "Get out of the car." I did as he said, feeling my knees wobble a little as I stepped onto the dirt outside. I didn't think I could get any more scared, but I was wrong, because when another guy spoke next, I felt like I honestly could have made an actual mess in my shorts. "It's a cop, man. Just shoot him and let's get out of here." That suddenly roused me from being all frozen and silent in fear. I just started saying, "I'm not a cop, I swear to God. I'm just looking for my grandpa's place." It all came out in one long frenzied sentence, and I can't really write everything I said into this. I was stammering though, and my voice was shaking. I was just a mess. The same guy who'd talked before piped up again. "He's lying, man. Just kill him. We can't lose this shipment." And that was the only clue I had as to what was going down in that meeting. I've agreed with a few other people's suggestions that it was drug-related. I didn't know this at the time, but Douglas County, the county that Omaha is in, has a huge meth problem, probably the biggest in the entire country. As myself and many others suspect, I probably stumbled across some sort of meth deal. Probably a pretty big one too, considering some of the hardware that was on display. Not only did I have some kind of gun in my face the whole time, but the other guys emerged with guns I'd only ever seen in Call of Duty. I'm talking the kinds with all sorts of attachments and stuff on them. Like I said, there was a hot minute there where I really did think I was about to die. Then I heard a guy with a pistol trained on me say, "Get the tape." I started to think that they might have something even worse in mind for me. What's weird though is that even though that didn't mean they were going to kill me, my survival instincts told me to at least buy a little more time. Thinking about it now, letting them tie me up like they did could have easily secured my death, not helped me avoid it. But still, I just let them do what they did in hopes that compliance might lead to mercy. They put tape over my eyes as well as around my wrists and ankles. They made me kneel in the dirt as they frisked me. I'm pretty sure they searched my car too. I mean it when I said they had some serious hardware, because I'm assuming you need something pretty advanced to make sure there's no secret recording equipment on a car. One of the guys said, "Car's clean," at one point. That made me realize these guys weren't just your average crackheads. I piped up again that I was not a cop, and that they could search me all they liked, but they wouldn't find a badge or a gun or anything like that. That didn't seem to satisfy them though. They kept arguing amongst themselves about what to do with me. They took out my license at one point because I could hear them passing it around and asking each other, "You know this guy? You recognize him?" Stuff like that. I can't even describe how relieved I was when I heard them all agree they'd never seen me before and that I probably really wasn't any kind of undercover cop or something. I was praying that meant they wouldn't kill me, but at the same time I knew I was still in quite a bit of trouble. Not long after that, they decided what they were going to do with me. The guy who'd been suggesting they kill me kept on making that suggestion. Then, the guy who'd ordered me tied up told him to shut the fuck up, saying killing me was a bad idea. During these few moments of pure terror, he was like my best friend in the world. If it had been the bloodthirsty one in charge, I definitely wouldn't be around to write this. Then, right as it seemed I was going to get away unharmed, the boss of the group seemed to have a sudden change of heart. I started wailing about how I'd never snitch, how I'd just drive off and forget everything I saw. I'd caused them no trouble whatsoever, but that didn't seem to do the trick. When I heard the boss doing something with his gun, I begged him over and over not to kill me. I tried everything, reminding him it would be too much trouble, that I was sorry for interrupting them, that I didn't see anything, but not a word came out of my mouth that seemed to change his mind. I hadn't even finished talking when I felt him press the gun to the back of my head, and I felt myself starting to cry under the tape they'd wrapped around my eyes. I wished I'd never gotten out of bed that morning. The last thing I heard him say before he pulled the trigger was, "Start digging a hole." Every muscle in my body seemed to tense up in preparation for oblivion. I heard the trigger pull with a dull click that seemed to echo around my skull. Then there was nothing though. No bang, no pain, no blood and brains. I wasn't falling forward or backward or wherever. I was still just kneeling there, tensed up, feeling pee trickle down my thigh. They all started laughing at me, laughing at how I'd begged and pleaded with them not to kill me. It was just some cruel prank to instill the fear of God into me. Let me tell you, it worked. I felt the hot breath of the boss on the back of my neck. I'm keeping your license. If anything happens, I'm sending someone to pay you a visit. Think of it as an insurance policy. I was later told this was called dry firing, or something like that. After that, they tossed me in the backseat of a car, and from the very short distance I was moved, I figured I was back on my own. Not long after, I heard engines gunning, then moving vehicles, then silence. They left me there in the back of my car, tied up and blindfolded, for what felt like days. In reality, it was around 24 hours. If a passing farmer using the back roads hadn't spotted me, there's a real chance I might have died of dehydration. My phone had upwards of 50 missed calls. I had been reported missing by my parents. It was a whole ordeal, and obviously a big part of what followed was being questioned by police. I didn't ask to talk to them, but considering how I was found, it was a sure thing. I just stonewalled the deputy, who showed up and told my parents why I had refused to say a word about what happened. That was honestly the worst part. Having my own life threatened and being subjected to what amounted to a mock execution was one thing, but having my own mom and dad realize they were no longer safe in their own home was another thing entirely. We moved shortly after that, living with family in Des Moines for a few weeks. After, we could find an apartment, which my mom and dad then used as a base to sell their house. Every so often, the cruel, maddening chaos of it all hits me at once. Our entire lives were uprooted, all because of one wrong turn I made on a dirt road. My 4-year-old daughter was supposedly asleep when I heard some noises coming from her upstairs bedroom. I tried to listen, but I couldn't quite make out what was being said. I approached the room, and she stopped talking as I did. Thinking I'd alarmed her, I walked into the room. At the time, she was sharing it with her 3-year-old sister. I walked in and saw my 4-year-old sitting up in bed. I smiled and asked her if everything was okay. She said they were fine, but her sister said that someone was keeping her up. I asked who was doing this. My 4-year-old apologized and said she had been talking to someone. When I asked her who it was, my 3-year-old sat up and said the girl in the window. I asked who this girl in the window was, and they both told me that a girl would come and stand in front of their window every night and talk to them. Not knowing what to say, I said okay and tucked them back in. I hung around outside their door the next day though, and I asked for more information about this girl. They said she'd come back that night, but she was mad. I waited for a few days and asked them again. Apparently that girl in the window was really mad at them. I'd forgotten about it for a week. I'd chalked this all up to just their imagination. But then one night, my wife noticed it too. She asked me who the girls were talking to upstairs. Freaked out, I ran up and found both of the girls sitting under the window, looking upward. They turned and looked at me and asked if I wanted to meet the girl at the window. When they turned around though, they looked quite disappointed. They said the girl had fled into the night. It's been about 5 years, and ever since that night, I've not heard mention of this girl at the window ever again. When I was about 11, some friends and I were having a slumber party. We all snuck out of the house in the middle of the night and went to a park about a half block away. We had been there for at least an hour or so when I thought I saw a large figure about 100 feet away from us and lurking in the shadows. They appeared to be hiding underneath some trees. We all turned to look and stare at the shadow's direction for about 5 minutes, trying to make out what this was. Right when we just about decided we were seeing things though, The figure started sprinting out of the darkness at top speed towards us. We jumped up and ran back to the house as fast as we could go. We locked the door behind us, and we could hear someone moving around outside the house. Then someone began to tap on the windows. We couldn't wake anyone up though, since we would have to admit we'd snuck out at night. We spent the entire rest of the night huddled together in the middle of the living room. None of us could get any sleep, and we went all the way until the morning completely terrified. For a brief backstory, I used to work as a fetish model. It's something I did after college to help pay off my student bills and supplement my full-time job. It was a unique fetish with a rather dedicated fan base, and I had quite a few admirers, many of whom I stayed friends with even after I stopped modeling. Most of them were cool people who didn't really bring up my former employment because they respected me and knew I was a private person. I rarely had many problems. There was this one guy though who would just constantly send me harassing messages all the time. They were aggressive and demeaning, and I didn't really want that sort of attention. He would try to be kind for a while, then be a creep again, so eventually I just blocked him. I totally forgot about him. Somehow though, he got my phone number and would blow up my phone with calls and texts. I blocked him there too, but he would just message me from other random numbers. Eventually, I had to change my number altogether. On social media, he would make fake profiles and try to harass me that way too. Because of that, I stopped adding anyone I didn't know personally. Still though, all this was stuff I could just ignore. I found him annoying and unbalanced for sure, but not really a real threat to me. Many years had passed by, and there had been silence from him for a very long time. After a couple of years, though, I got a message from a random girl wanting to be my friend. I didn't buy this person at all, though. They had that same distinct way of writing as my particular admirer. As I said before, very demeaning and very demanding, certain phrases used over and over. I blocked the person and ignored the message. After some more time, I started putting myself out there and doing some online dating. I had gone on some lame dates the past couple of weeks when I got a match with someone who sounded pretty damn nice and friendly. After a few messages back and forth, we agreed to have dinner and traded our numbers. I have to say, the beginning of the date was actually really nice. My date was very considerate, and we had a nice, easy conversation. After eating and drinking, we left the restaurant to walk back to his place. Even the walk was very pleasant. We got back to his apartment, and things were starting to get hot and heavy. I was really starting to dig this guy, until he leaned in and whispered in my ear, "Why did you make me wait for so long?" When he said that, my stomach did a little flip. I asked him what he meant, and he told me he'd moved all the way from the East Coast in order to find me. My stomach started to drop even more, and I started shaking. In that moment, it was like something in his brain flipped, like a switch went off, and instead of the gentleman I'd been with all evening, he started spewing the same kinds of online harassment he had messaged me for years. He spewed out exact details from conversations almost 7 years ago, which I had mostly forgotten about. He seemed very angry I didn't remember each individual thing. I was standing there shocked, realizing what was happening. I noticed he kept looking behind me at an open laptop. I'm fairly certain he was recording what was happening. I told him I didn't feel very well and needed to leave right now, as calmly as I could. I didn't want to let him on the fact I was completely terrified. He must have known how scared I was though, because he grabbed me hard and told me he wanted me to swear this wouldn't be the last time I'd see him. I smiled and nodded and offered to go to dinner another night while wriggling out of his grasp. I didn't know if just playing it cool was going to work in this situation, but I was prepared to start fighting if I had to. To my surprise though, he relented and let me go to the bathroom to put my skirt back on. I was able to walk back to my car by myself. I drove in shock and silence the whole way home. I found out he'd given me a fake name to get this date with me. He changed his demeanor and took advantage of the fact I didn't know what he looked like in real life. Afterwards, I Googled his real name when I got home and found his Facebook page. That confirmed he was in fact the very same man that had been harassing me for years. I hadn't bothered to look at this Facebook page before because I didn't feel like he was a threat in real life. I felt really stupid, so I immediately blocked the number he had been using for this fake persona. I guess I'll have to change my number again too. I'm sure he'll just find a way to keep calling me if I don't. I deleted my dating profile, of course, and I won't be going out again for a while. I'm going to go to the police as well, and hopefully that will put this guy on their radar. Luckily for me, I hadn't ever mentioned where I worked or where I lived specifically. I feel pretty good about that at least, and now I know what he looks like in real life, so I can at least be aware of him in the future. I feel horrible that I let myself be so vulnerable, but I will say I am certainly paying attention now. This happened 6 or 7 years ago, when I was around 13 years old and still in school. I was walking home one day, going through town. The weather was unbearable. Now, I like that nice, sunny, warmth sort of vibe, but the horrible bastard heat blanket type that suffocates you was going on right now. Anyway, I took off some of my school uniform, which consisted of a heavy wool blazer, long-sleeved gray jumper, and tie. This was a mandatory outfit. Living in Ireland and going to grammar school, there were some heavy-ass dress codes that people had been wearing since 1667. When I had just about first opened my shirt, I started to head on my merry way, when all of a sudden this old man beckoned me to come over from across the street. He had to be about 60 to 70 years old. He was wearing a cap and leather jacket. This was something that had landed me in trouble before, but I absolutely cannot turn down a conversation, regardless of if it's local junkies approaching me or clear red flag scenarios. I always just go along with it unintentionally. I walked over to this guy, thinking he might need some directions or something. The first thing he asked me, though, was if I wanted some sweets. He offered me a Terry's chocolate orange. When I reached out to take a piece from him, he grabbed my hand and stared straight into my eyes. He held my hand and started to caress it slowly. He then asked me if I would like to come back to his house for a cup of tea. Surely you must be tired and thirsty. Now, I know the sensible thing to do here was to call for an adult. Seeing as there were hundreds around, Belfast is a busy place. There were often police that patrolled the street as well. All I had to do was shout and make a scene. Instead, what came out of my mouth was a simple no. Without any resistance, I easily released myself from his grip and took a piece of the chocolate orange, then walked back over to my bus stop. I looked over my shoulder to see him staring back at me, mouth agape. I guess he really hadn't expected that. After a few seconds, he hurried off around the corner. I realize now the smart thing to do would have been to report him, seeing as this could have happened to anyone else my age, and the man could still be out there. This is the first time I've ever told this story though, so nobody else knows. Even though the immediate danger wasn't there, I think the implication warrants a mention. My name is Leia. I'm 11, and this is one of those stories that happened to me and my mom. The first time happened in 2018 when I was 6 years old. I'll say this right now. Thank goodness I inherited my mom's photographic memory, because otherwise some of this may not make sense at all. I remember it was February 11th, 6 days before my birthday. My mom, grandma, uncle, and I were in the family truck on our way to the local Walmart to get some groceries. My mom wanted to pick out my cake herself. She said if I was good, maybe she'd even give me a toy as an early birthday present. I really wanted this particular doll because I really loved the movie Brave. I told my mom that I'd be really good. She just laughed and said, "I know, Pumpkin. Just remember what Mom said. Don't talk to strangers or go anywhere with them." I nodded. I was a bit of a spunky, wild child. Grandma always called me Little Marita because of how stubborn and wild I was. I always tried to be good for my mom though, so she'd have just a little bit less stress on her. We arrived at Walmart and my uncle got a cart. My mom put me in the toddler seat in front and buckled me in before wheeling it toward the doors. As we walked closer to the entrance doors, I saw two people, a man and a woman. They looked to be in their 20s or so, and were just standing by the doorway. They were stopping people and talking to them while they held out these small oranges, asking kids in particular if they'd like to have one. My uncle rolled his eyes and said in a bored tone, "Look at those weirdos, probably begging for money instead of getting a real job. What losers, the whole bunch." My mom replied in a stern tone, "Jack, you don't know that for sure. Maybe they're just trying to be nice. Don't set a bad example for Leia." We entered the store, and about 2 hours later, we had finished our shopping. We checked out. I had my doll and her box right next to me in the seat. Mom took the card and wheeled me outside. I heard a man's voice call out in a kind tone, "Excuse me." I turned around and saw the two people from before coming up to us. Now that they were close up, I saw that they looked very dirty, and something was a bit off as well. Their eyes kind of gave away that they might have some not-so-nice things in mind. The man came up and stopped our cart. I quickly moved my hand away from him. I could see orange peelings on his fingers, and they looked very sticky. The man looked at my mom, then looked at me. "Your daughter's so cute. Can me and my girlfriend pray over her? I want to know that one of God's angels are safe with a loving soul like you." My mom, wise to the fact that something very weird was happening, then said, "No thank you, we have to get home soon." "We have to get to Dad, don't we, honey? Somebody needs to give Dad a big hug and kiss when we see him, don't you think?" "We'll be going now." She turned and started to walk away, but the man jumped out front yet again. "Come on, it'll be a short prayer." He promised he wouldn't do anything else. I saw the woman circling around my mom, though. She looked like she was going to try and grab my mom's purse. That's when I yelled out, "Mom, she's gonna take your purse!" I then saw Uncle Jack running towards us from the truck. He'd gone to unlock it and help Mom get me in along with the groceries. I heard my uncle yell, "Hey, get the hell away from them, you creeps!" The man turned, and Uncle Jack then shoved him away. The woman pulled out a knife and pointed it right at my uncle, who then laughed. "Yeah, go ahead and try it, you bitch. I'll drop you right where you stand." She did try him, and that was a big mistake on her part. Within what seemed like seconds, the blade had been smacked right out of her hand and out of reach. I was in tears, screaming at the man, who looked ready to attack my uncle as well. Somebody else was yelling that the cops were on their way. When they finally arrived, the two were arrested. One of the officers asked if I wanted my doll out of the box so I could hold her to feel safe. He opened up the box for me. He seemed like a really nice guy. He told me that I was like Marita for being so brave, and also for warning my mom about what the man was trying to do. I asked if we could go home and celebrate my birthday now. The officer smiled and gave us the go-ahead. He even called me a little hero and said I could have 2 pieces of cake that night. I earned the second piece. As we drove home, Uncle Jack looking at my mom, he then said, "Yeah, what did I say? You can't trust weirdos like those." He then glanced at me in the rearview mirror and smirked. "I guess I owe you another present for your birthday." So, yeah, that weird couple that wanted to pray over me, I have an amazing idea. How about the two of you never come close to us ever again? What's one place you can go to find the weirdest, freakiest creatures in our society? I swear, I've never been to a single Walmart where I didn't see at least one eye-catchingly strange human being. Strange doesn't even begin to cut it though, for the story I'm about to tell you. It was the Thursday before Black Friday. My Walmart was open extra late. I was in there around 11 o'clock in the morning or so, looking for a new laptop. By chance, I picked up off the shelf the last one that was being promoted for a really good Black Friday deal. As I grabbed it, some big, revolting, dirty-looking guy came up to me and insisted he needed this laptop very badly. I nervously told him I was sorry. It was the last one, and I'd gotten there first. He got very angry at me and started making a bit of a scene. The man clearly wasn't normal. My heart started racing, simply because I don't get put in these kinds of situations very often. As others looked on at the commotion ensuing with this big guy, I walked away with the laptop box quickly and went straight to the line. He kept yelling at me as I walked away. It was unbelievable. Some of the other customers in line even tried to laugh with me and make me feel a bit better, saying this guy was clearly a nut. I get home and my family is asleep already. I go outside to sit in my yard by the pool and set up my new laptop for a bit. Then though, the light on the side of my house turned on, the one that activates due to movement. I went to check the side of the house to make sure no one was there. That thing would go off every once in a while because of small animals or something. There was a small patch of woods right next to our home, so animals would often run through on the property, triggering it every now and then. Either way, I'm kind of a big pussy, so I went inside, locked the door, and finished setting up my laptop in the living room instead. All of a sudden, a car alarm started going off outside. I recognized it to be my Cadillac. I looked out the window to confirm this. I ran to get my keys upstairs, then tried pressing the panic button to turn off the alarm. It didn't work from inside, so I stepped out onto the porch and clicked it off. Then though, I noticed a car parked in front of our house that wasn't there earlier when I'd gotten home. Any cars parked in this area of the street on our block was suspicious enough already. We lived in a closed-off community, and everyone had huge driveways. I stepped down from the stoop and realized there was someone sitting in that car. I went back inside and locked the door behind me. I went to my mom's room and told her I thought someone was outside, meaning us harm. My mom and dad have a complicated situation, so my dad doesn't always stay with us. This may have been a different story had my dad been there to tell him about this. My mom came downstairs with me, noticeably worried based on what I'd told her. My mom took a look through the peephole in the front door, then gasped and put her hands over her mouth. I looked through it as well and felt ready to throw up when I saw a huge man standing on the other side of the door on our stoop. I whispered to my mom, "I think that man followed me from Walmart." Suddenly, the doorknob started to turn as the man tried to open the door. When it didn't work, he started pounding on it as hard as he could. That's when my mom let out a gasp and a cry, and my younger sister came out from her room. She also started to panic. The pounding stopped after a while, and there was silence for a bit, other than my mom's voice on the phone with the police. A few minutes went by, my mom still on the line with 911, with police en route. There was a loud bang and crash downstairs in the den. A window had just been shattered. My mom and sister both screamed and cried. I told them to hide, while I locked the door to the den. I waited down there, expecting an attempt at forcing open the door, a bang or anything. Nothing came, surprisingly. I heard the police car briefly wail its siren outside my house. It was the quickest response time I'd ever seen. I ran outside to lead them to the den where the broken glass was. There, they found the huge, dirty, and crazy-looking man hiding behind one of our couches. He was arrested at once, and we pressed full charges. All the while, he was screaming profanities and threats at me, obviously not helping his case one bit. Both cops told me the guy seemed mentally unstable and seemed to be on some kind of drugs. They told us to get a good night's rest because he wouldn't be bothering us again. While it may be fun to people watch at Walmart and laugh at some of the goofy things you see, realize you may also find some of the most dangerous people in our society sitting there at your local Walmart. My name is Samantha. I'm 20 years old and work at a Walmart by a small town named Jackson in Alabama. Since I don't go to school full-time, my boss would oftentimes put me on an overnight shift. This happened back when the store was open 24 hours a day. Given that it was a supercenter, there would still be a number of employees working my shift. This one particular night, I got a 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift, and I was one of the only couple of employees doing stock work there. There was one or two other employees at the registers up front. Given that our store sits in the countryside of Alabama, we didn't exactly get much business at these insane hours of the night. It was, however, a prime restocking period. I didn't personally know the other employees working that night, but it's not like we'd run into each other in this gigantic store anyway. I started my night off folding pants in the men's department and generally tidying up the place. I kept headphones in at night because usually there would be no one to tell me to take them out. At that time, a customer wandered into the jeans section. It was around 11:30 p.m. or so it wasn't really that weird. People would still come in every now and then and close shop, usually until around midnight or so. The customer came up to me and asked me if we had any more of the specific pair of pants he'd found in a different waist size. I apologized and told him only whatever was on the rack was available. He thanked me and walked away. I made accidental eye contact with him as soon as he stood by the rack putting the jeans back. It was kind of awkward, and he just walked away. I simply continued on with my work. Some time passed by, and the store started to look like a complete ghost town. There was no one to be seen as far as the eye could see. I think it was about 1 a.m. or so. I made my way over to the appliances section. I was doing a lot of back and forth work with boxes from the back. It was the area where we kept all the items that were yet to go out. I brought a wagon full of boxes to one of the aisles and started to restock the shelves. Because the shelves were relatively empty at this time of night though, I was able to look through and see someone in the next aisle over. I could tell they were watching me. Well, that was up until he'd noticed me notice him, and then he looked away. His eyes looked really familiar though. I stepped closer to get a better view and realized it was the exact same customer from 2 hours earlier. How in the world could this guy still be in the store? Without making it obvious, I took the wagon with me and passed the next aisle over just to get a good look and see if the man had any items in his hands or something. His hands were completely empty. No way he could still be shopping for 2 hours and not pick up a single thing. Something obviously wasn't right here. I quickly finished up restocking the shelf with coffee machines and other appliances, then brought the empty wagon to the back area. I chilled out in there for a while because, quite frankly, I felt like that guy may have been following me or watching me longer than I'd realized. I played on my phone for a little while in the employee lounge. I figured it was about time to get back to work though, and decided I would do some grocery work instead, just to be in a different part of the store. I went into the dairy cooler and filled a bunch of crates with dairy products like milk and yogurt. This took a lot of time to do because I had to individually check the dates on each product and such. Over the loud sound of the giant refrigerators keeping the cooler cold, I heard the door to the dairy cooler burst open. There was conveniently a gap in the boxes sitting on one of the pallets that allowed me to peek through to the door of the cooler. I shit you not, it was that same customer. I ran to cover under one of the shelves and pushed a big box of eggs in front of me. I didn't really have to worry about making noise because the refrigerators were so loud on their own. For anyone wondering why I decided to hide, well, I already assumed this guy was hanging around the store watching me. Seeing him in the employees only section, never mind that, coming into the dairy cooler, seemingly something bad was definitely about to go down. I hid behind that box with my head down for the longest time, expecting to hear the doors of the cooler open and close. Eventually, after a while of hiding and not hearing anything, I assumed maybe he'd left. I lifted my head from my arms for the first time and looked up in front of the box. I screamed. He was right there, smiling at me, standing over me. His smile vanished as soon as I started to scream. He tried putting his hands over my lips to muffle my noise, but I didn't allow that to go any further. I pushed the box of eggs over right onto him. The eggs fell to the floor and made him step back, looking down at his shoes. I ran right past him, but he didn't attempt to grab me. I continued to run until I found another stock worker and told him to help me. The employee's name was Bob. I remember from his name tag. Suddenly, the man from the dairy cooler came up to the two of us and apologized, explaining he was from corporate and was coming to make sure everything was running smoothly. He said he didn't mean to scare me and was simply checking up on me in the dairy cooler to make sure I wasn't slacking off. This Bob guy seemed to really believe it all, but then again, he didn't seem a very smart sort. I asked the man then why he'd put his hand over my mouth. He said he was trying to avoid making a scene. Then he shockingly gave me the order to finish up the appliance section and disappeared as he speed-walked away down the aisle. Before he left though, I called out, "What's your name then?" He called back Tom. Just like that, he was gone. The next day, I called one of the managers and asked if there was supposed to be a visit from corporate that night and if a creepy man named Tom sounded familiar. My manager, Margaret, said it sounded like complete horse shit. There was no record of anyone from corporate named Tom who was supposed to come visit that night, nor would anyone from corporate ever be in the store at 2 a.m. They went ahead and checked the camera footage. A police report was filed when they realized this was a random man. The cameras proved this man had been stalking me between the aisles for the better part of the first few hours of my shift. I told Margaret I couldn't do night shifts anymore after that, and she understood. I still worked there, but more so as a day stock person or a cashier now. Let me preface this by saying I'm just a domestic engineer living in North Texas. I don't believe in paranormal, ghosts, demons, or aliens, or whatever else. I did have an event happen to me this Halloween though, that I have to admit kinda has me scratching my head ever since then. So, we'd been having a slow trick-or-treating night in our neighborhood. That was pretty odd in and of itself. We usually have kids from all different areas dropping off in ours and constantly parading around our door. That night, I'd say we had no more than 8 to 10 groups of kids though. It was around 9:30 or so, and my husband and I were sitting in our family room watching some of those ghost shows based on supposedly true events. Like I said, I kinda scoff at that kinda stuff. I do like a good ghost story every now and then though, and I was in the Halloween mood. We hadn't had any activity at the door in over half an hour or so, and it was getting quite late now. We decided to turn the porch light on and let our dog Chloe out of her crate. Chloe is an American bulldog. We only put her in the crate because we were afraid she'd try and get out and play with all the kids, and I didn't want to have to chase her down every time down the street. I also didn't want her scaring or intimidating anyone away because she can be a little bit scary when she's excited. I turned the outside light off, let Chloe out, and she followed me back to the couch. She laid down on my feet. It was getting close to 10 p.m. or so when my husband decided he'd had enough fun for the night and was going upstairs to take a shower and get ready for bed. After all, it was a Thursday, and he still had to get up early for the next day. Our teenage son was out with his friends at the local haunted house and wasn't expected back for another hour or so. That left me all alone on the couch with Chloe. Just because I don't believe doesn't mean that those shows don't freak me out though, and being alone now, I have to say I was kind of on edge watching the shows. It wasn't long until I heard the upstairs shower turn on. All of a sudden, the light came on in the patio. My initial reaction was, what the hell? Really? It's almost 10 p.m. Soon though, an uneasy feeling came over me. Why was nobody ringing our doorbell? It glows in the dark, and without the porch light on, it should have been extra obvious to everyone there. I paused. I couldn't really ignore it. Our door had a big glass panel, and everyone right by the door could easily see inside and know I was just sitting there watching TV. It would have been rude for me to not answer whoever was there. Just before I got up though, there was a knocking sound from the door. I glanced down at Chloe, only to find she was already gone. My gaze followed her usual path to the front door, expecting her to be on her way there as she normally did. Instead though, I looked around the room and found her crouching by the back door like she wanted to go out. I have to say this strange behavior heightened my anxiety. "Chloe, crate," I said. She just turned back to look at me like I was crazy though. I yelled up to my husband, but if he was already in the shower, I knew there was no chance of him hearing me. That was about the time a car drove by our street and cast enough light on the door for me to see the silhouettes of two small people through the glass. I instantly felt relieved as it was just some kids. Probably a couple from my neighborhood even, on their way back home after a long night of trick-or-treating. Maybe wanting a bit extra or something. I headed for the door and marched back to make sure Chloe wasn't following me. I turned the porch light on. When I got to the door, sure enough, I could see through the glass what appeared to be a couple of pretty small kids. Out late for such young ones, I thought. I began to wonder what kind of parents would let their kids run around the streets this late at night alone. I opened the door just enough to see who was outside. What struck me as immediately odd was that these kids were not wearing any costumes. They were just wearing normal street clothes. There was no customary trick-or-treat either. I began to feel a bit uneasy. It was one girl and one boy. The girl on my left was older, I'd say around 11 or 12. I could tell she was blonde but couldn't make out any distinct features, as our lights come from high above and on the columns at the front porch, so most of the light was coming in from behind them. The boy was younger and about a foot shorter, I'd say between 8 or 9. The girl very politely spoke up. "Ma'am, can we please come inside and use your phone to call our mother?" As she spoke though, something in the pit of my stomach was telling me that something was wrong. What kind of kid that age didn't have a phone of their own these days? I couldn't even remember the last time I had someone ask me to use my home phone. "Huh? Don't you have a phone of your own that you can call your mom on?" I asked. This is when things got really weird. They both turned to look at one another, as if they were supposed to say something, but neither of them spoke. They both turned back to me at once, and the girl said, "Ma'am, my cell phone battery doesn't have any charge left. Can we please come inside and call our mother? We're alone out here, and my brother is scared." I have to admit there were two competing feelings going on inside me. The first, that of a mother's heart wanting to help these two small children. But there was that sinking fear in my gut that was keeping that feeling at bay. It was then that I noticed during the short conversation, the door had already opened a few extra inches. I was completely unaware of having done so myself. "Honey, why don't you give me your mother's number and I'll call her myself?" There was another pause, and they again looked at each other. After a short moment, they turned back to me. "Ma'am, my little brother has to use your bathroom. Can we please come inside while you call our mother?" With that last statement, the little girl moved closer to the door, almost as if she was just going to walk inside. As she did, she stepped into the light coming from inside the house, and I got my first real good look at her. She had these solid black eyes. That's all I could see. The motherly instinct was gone and replaced by terror. I don't think I've ever felt that before in my entire life. I could feel every hair on my arm and the back of my neck standing at attention. I closed the door to where my face was just able to stick out a little bit. The girl again pleaded, "Please, ma'am, we're really scared and alone out here. We have to come inside. Please help us." Then, like on cue, both kids began to whimper and fake cry. I shut the door and locked it. "I'll call your mom if you give me the number," I shouted through the door, "but I'm not letting you into my house." I could still see them standing there on the porch, just staring at me through the glass pane. Part of me wanted to run upstairs to my husband, but the bigger part didn't want to lose track of where they were. That would have freaked me out even more, to know they were not there. After what seemed like forever, probably only a few seconds, I decided to call my neighbor who lived across the street. As I made my way to the side table by our couch to get my phone, though, I glanced back to the door. I got my phone and started to look for his contact info. That was when the kids stepped away and began walking off into the street. As they did so, I went over to the door to get a better look at who they were, where they went too. I could see that the kids had walked out to stand under the street lamp nearest my house and were staring in at me. As I lifted my phone to my ear, only then did the kids start walking down our street. I met up with my neighbor out under the lamp once he was out there, but the kids were nowhere to be seen. Like I said, I don't really believe in any paranormal stuff. I had never even heard about black-eyed kids before talking to my friend. What I really think, what I have to think, is that these kids were just yanking my chain on Halloween night. But I will say this for them. They were really, really good at it, because they scared the fuck out of me and my dog, black-eyed kids or not. Thinking back about this, it still seems like something out of a horror movie and makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. So me and a girl drive her car out to a nature center at around 11 p.m. one night. The gate was never closed after business hours, so we stopped the car in a parking lot overlooking a marsh. There was a boardwalk which ran through it, and heavy brush as well. Fleetwood Mac was playing over the stereo, and we were just shooting the shit. 10 to 15 minutes after we'd parked the car, I swore I could see a flickering light far off in the brush. We both kinda shrugged it off, as we were in the middle of nowhere. Who the hell was going to be roaming around in the woods of a closed-down nature center? As you can imagine, it's pretty damn dark in a marsh at night. Once your eyes adjust, though, you can just about make out silhouettes and see things directly in front of you. That's about it, though. Fast forward to 15 more minutes later. We're making out in the driver's seat, and she's sitting next to me. Both of our seats were sort of reclined back, and I was leaning over half on top of her. After a few minutes of this, I leaned up to say something to her when I noticed a big dark object pressed up against the passenger side window. At first, it didn't quite register. Then it hit me like a ton of bricks, though. I realized there was a man with his face pressed right up against the window, watching us. I shot back a bold stare at the man, but he did not seem to move or react at all. The girl looked at me, then traced my line of sight over to the window and screamed. With that, the guy took off and ran off into the marsh. I turned the car on and put that nature center in the rearview mirror as fast as I could. I worked in the graveyard shift doing security at a facility that had a couple of large warehouses on it. It was Christmas Day, so there were not many other people on the property at all, which was going to mean a super easy night for me. As I was roving around doing my patrols, though, I noticed one of the bay doors was open in one of the warehouses. It was odd for any of them to be left open at all, so I decided to check out what was going on. I walked over to the bay door and walked inside. One thing I must point out now is that in an effort to save money on utilities, all the lights in the warehouse are motion activated and turn on as you walk underneath them. After you're out of range of the sensor, the lights immediately shut off. That means the lights are never on unless someone is moving directly underneath them. As I peered into the warehouses, I looked down one of the aisles of shelves and saw a light on in the distance, approximately 300 yards away. As I watched, the next one turned on, and then the next. The lights were coming toward me, as if there were someone moving in my direction. Yet I could see absolutely nothing in the aisles. After watching the lights move all around the facility for a few moments, I got weirded out and left. I never figured out why it happened, but it creeps me out whenever I think about it. When I was in college, I took a part-time job stocking shelves at Kohl's. We would arrive at 2 a.m. and work until 7 in the morning. Each morning, we'd have 5 people arrive like clockwork. We would all walk in through the same door and take the far left aisle to get to the back of the store, where the employee lounge was located. On this morning, though, I took the middle aisle because I wanted to bypass the lounge and go straight to the inventory room to load up my cart. Department stores are really creepy when they're not open yet, especially with 90% of the lights turned off. The floor sometimes has mannequins half-dressed and in the aisles because they're constantly shifting product around after closing up the day before. On this morning, I walked down the center aisle and noticed this man walking from the back of the store to the front. He looked to be an older man, wearing business clothes of some sort. Obviously, I thought this was out of place, but sometimes the regional manager would show up. It was very early, and this guy was very tall. As we approached one another, I couldn't get a good enough view of his face to really tell. He seemed to be wearing these really thick eyeglasses that cast a shadow over his mouth and chin, blocking any chance of making eye contact. Because of this, it was really awkward when we got within 10 feet of each other. I just looked down and said good morning, giving a quick look. I couldn't really see his face still, so I just looked back down. He gave me a cheerful good morning response as I continued to the back. The man continued on to the front, and I went into the inventory room. I began unboxing items and placing them on the cart. The manager of the morning team came back and started giving me instructions for the Christmas items. She was the sort of person that was very charismatic and always happy. After she finished, I asked her who that corporate guy from earlier I saw that morning was. She gave me a weird look and said nobody was expected to be there. She asked me for a description, and I shared it with her. At first, she thought it could be the new regional marketing guy, but we realized that couldn't be it, because he didn't have the keys to get inside yet, and they never come at 2 o'clock in the morning anyway. She darted off to the neighboring admin office to find out if anyone was expected, and I went back to work. 20 minutes later, she came back, saying that indeed nobody was expected to be there. The security system showed no entry since closing that night before. She asked me if I was messing around, or if I'd been drinking or something. I told her to check the cameras because I'd definitely seen someone. She asked if I would go with her to check the camera feed. I agreed, and we walked to the room. She was joking around, saying, "Let's go see if we can find your new imaginary friend here." She pulled up the interface for the cameras and set the dial to the hour we arrived. It started to play the first camera angle. At first, we saw nothing. I couldn't remember exactly where I'd crossed paths with the man. She asked me if this really was the area. My mind was blown. I really started to question my sanity. There's no way he was not in the camera feed. She pulled up the next angle, though, and this time, we saw a shadowy figure moving around in the back next to the walls. They were quickly scrambling around, weaving in between the clothes racks with the clothes moving on their own hangers. They ran through the women's section. I went from questioning my sanity to being completely freaked out. We both got the chills. She stood up to turn the lights on in the room that we were in, and we both looked in disbelief. After viewing it again, she decided to look from all angles to make sure this really happened. She clicked the next camera pointed in that direction. As it started to play, we saw the dark shape more resemble a person this time. Clearly, this person was moving about on all fours though, low to the ground like something you'd see in an Exorcist movie. At this point, the manager picked up the phone to call 911. While she was on the phone with them, she clicked the next camera angle, which gave us the overhead 360-degree view. I get goosebumps thinking about this. You could see the man in his clothes, but I could finally see his face, which is what made our jaws drop. In surprise, she hung up the phone. I screamed at her for hanging it up, and she picked it up again to dial 911. To this day, I still really can't explain it. It was almost like the man had no mouth or something wrong with his face. He had those glasses on, and no lights were able to get through them to see his eyes. It made it difficult to confirm what he really looked like. We played the next camera at the exact same time. We arrived to the point showing him going toward the front of the building. As we watched though, we never saw him leave. As we looked at further camera angles from right now, we confirmed there was someone in the back moving to the front of the building again. As they moved past the dressing room, there was a gap in the midsection between the cameras that couldn't be found. She asked me to get on the overhead speaker and ask everyone to come to the lounge. I did so, and heard her telling the police we had an intruder or a possible squatter and didn't feel safe. She asked that they hurry. She got on the intercom and told everybody to come once again, but stated it was for a quick meeting. She switched the screens on the live camera feed to focus on the front entrance, seeing if anyone would show up or leave. I started to hear everyone coming to the lounge. We received notification from the 911 operator that 2 officers had arrived and asked that we open the door. Thank goodness, the patrolmen were sitting in the parking lot right next to the door. We asked that they come into the building because we felt the intruder might still be hiding in the middle area. We continued to look through the different camera angles until we heard banging on the door next to us. We jumped up in surprise but disarmed the locks. The 2 officers walked in, and we told them more details. They asked for one person to speak at a time and to slow down. After explaining that we believed the person was still there once again, they started to be more alert. One cop said he would stay with us, and the other volunteered to walk around the floor. As I showed the cop what we'd seen on the video earlier, he was disturbed by what he was seeing. These were obviously not normal moving patterns. He grabbed the radio on his shoulder and requested assistance. He specifically requested 5 of the closest patrolmen in the area. He asked if the brightness could be increased. She brightened it, but it didn't really help. Then came the distorted face scene. He was quite surprised that this really creepy guy went from a demon running on all fours to a casual guy from a distance earlier. He claimed he had never seen anything this bizarre and definitely felt the man was still in the building. Within 5 minutes, the other patrolmen started to show up, and they did a search of the store area. We all stayed in the back watching the cops. Nobody was found, and no video showed the man leaving. They got their paperwork and started interviewing us during this time. We viewed all the different angles and in fast-forward mode to see if we could find him again. We did find one strange instance where a coat fell from the hanger onto the ground, but nothing was near it, so no videos of anyone were found. Except for the crew that had closed the night before, the entry log showed no intrusion or access request was made. In the end, they had no idea who the man was or what happened to him. A report was filed, and the video was taken by the cops. They went to the neighboring stores and looked through their video feeds too, but found nothing. We opened at the usual time later that day, and nothing else unusual happened.